Epileptic seizure prediction, I talk to most physicians in the epilepsy space, it's considered the holy grail. Like, many people have been attempting seizure prediction in the past. It's the idea that if you can alert prior to a seizure, you can completely shift epilepsy treatment from reactive, which it is currently, to preventative. You could use that early alert to prevent all the issues that patients face.
Today, I'm talking to Truman Pierson, the founder and CEO of Theta Neurotech, a company building wearable seizure prediction technology for people living with epilepsy. His team is developing a discrete brain monitoring device that uses EEG signals and machine learning to spot shifts in brain activity that happen before a seizure, with the goal of giving patients and caregivers an advance warning. But Truman's journey with machine learning started much earlier, when he was still in college analyzing patient data sets across different metrics, essentially trying to build a Fitbit for the brain. Truman started Theta Neurotech as an undergraduate at the University of Chicago and has since then taken it through university accelerators, clinical collaborations, and now a venture-backed pre-seed round to bring this technology into the real world. In our conversation, we get into how his system works, how he found the problem, Theta's first prototype, and what it might mean for patients to finally have a heads up instead of being blindsided. Good to see you today and good to finally catch up after a while. So let's just dive right into it. For people who don't really know about what Theta Neurotech is doing, what are you guys doing and what are you guys building?
Yeah, so Theta Neurotech is developing a wearable platform for predicting epileptic seizures. So the platform includes little stickers that are worn behind both ears in the patch of skin between the ear and the hair. They continuously monitor non-invasive brain signal, EEG signal, coming from the temporal lobes of the brain. So we stream that data over Bluetooth to a paired mobile app, and then we have a machine learning model that detects changes in brain activity we found occur pretty consistently up to 2 hours prior to an epileptic seizure. So for context, almost 90% of patients with epilepsy lack consistent warning that a seizure is about to happen. So they experience a sudden loss of consciousness or motor control out of the blue. So our goal is to use neural signals and machine learning to detect changes that occur in brain activity prior to a seizure, so you can alert the patient and their caretaker of the impending seizure risk before it actually starts. So that's our goal, and kind of the problem solution that we're attempting to implement.
So then diving more into your origin story, where did you grow up? Looking back at your childhood, what were some of the experiences that made you who you are today at Theta?
Yeah, definitely. I grew up in northern Kentucky, so right outside of Cincinnati, Ohio. Lived in Cincinnati for the early part of my life, and then moved to Kentucky as a kid. It's really a good question because I did not grow up around people starting tech companies or medical device companies. A lot of the community in northern Kentucky was blue collar or working in finance in Cincinnati. So my venture into entrepreneurship, I think, was catalyzed a lot by going to school in Chicago. But one thing growing up in northern Kentucky was some of the blue collar attitude that the community and my family, brought to the table. I think it was always instilled in me to work hard and to be self-sufficient, and to treat people that you work with respect and dignity. So I think those qualities, while not many friends were starting tech companies or trying to build venture-backed companies, I think those qualities were instilled in me as a kid, and that helped lay the foundation for my personality now.
Yeah, it's always interesting to hear folks' backstories and how that contributes to who they are now, because it's foundational in a lot of ways, I feel. But so you mentioned a lot of folks around you were in finance, and you happened to study business economics and also computer science for a while. Is that part of what inspired you as well to go down that route?
Yeah, so I would say no is the opposite. So I study economics at University of Chicago, which is the most popular major at U Chicago. All my friends study economics. And somewhat counterintuitively, most of my friends or classmates in econ classes were not going down the entrepreneurship path. Most econ students at U Chicago will either try to go do investment banking in New York or do consulting. So that was the primary route. So even though I was studying business, the idea of starting a business was still a little bit out there, or not top of mind for most people. So even that at U Chicago was kind of a differentiating factor, the same as I was growing up in Northern Kentucky. So I think I did get elements of business school and met people that were smart through studying economics at U Chicago, but I was still kind of on a diverging path at that point too.
Throughout college, you had a variety of different software engineering internships, as well as being a fellow at different venture funds. What would that mix of experiences give you that now helps you today?
Yeah. So most importantly, I worked as an AI engineer at a major retailer my sophomore year in college. And that was my foray in computer vision, which now is the foundation for EEG classification models for our seizure prediction model that I developed. So in that internship, I was tasked to visually detect theft actually in the retailer's distribution centers. So it was through that I was forced to learn about computer vision and push vision to the limits, although in a completely different use case as epileptic seizure prediction, but it was a starting point for me. So that was an important experience. And then another great experience I had was working for a family office or a VC firm in New York my junior year summer. Family office called Loeb NYC, started by Michael Loeb, who incubates and invests in a bunch of different companies, a lot of CPG companies while I was there. And I was brought on as an intern to act as a software engineer for one of his portfolio companies, as well as participate within the broader Loeb ecosystem. So that gave me a great view into early stage startups, moving quickly, building teams. The startup I worked for is still doing well now, but was in the early stages and kind of initially launching the product. So that was a great experience. And then I was able to be a part of the broader Loeb ecosystem and meet a lot of other early stage startups through that. So I think that and the work at Kroger and AI were foundational experiences.
Earlier, you mentioned like you felt like you're on a diverging path. And I feel like a lot of people who want to be founders or are founders often feel like they're just the ones who are going off the beaten path, feeling like they're diverging. How did you deal with that? I'm sure being in college, thinking about starting your own company, not being around other folks who necessarily had the same goal. What were ways that kind of motivated you or opportunities that you saw that helped you get to where you are right now, starting from there?
Yeah, I think I am a little bit lucky in the sense that it's always been kind of my inclination to diverge a little bit. Like ask my parents, like I've always been kind of on this contrarian mindset for a lot of my life. Obviously, starting a company after growing up in Northern Kentucky where it's not that common, and then still doing that at University of Chicago. So I think it was actually my natural inclination to go that way. So it didn't necessarily, I would say, struggle with going on a different path than my classmates or friends necessarily. But, it did come with its challenges beyond that. It was initially hard to kind of build a really solid community around what we were doing at Theta. It was hard finding good co-founders and team members to join the team to support the next stages of development. So that took some time, but ultimately I ended up founding the company with one of my best friends from childhood and high school, as well as build a really great community at University of Chicago through the Polsky Center there. So in the initial stages without that community, it was a little bit tough. I wouldn't say psychologically for me personally, but for the goals and support of the company. But ultimately we built that over time.
Let's delve into that. So your co-founder is Chris Fitz, right? How's it like building a company with one of your close friends? I assume there's a level of trust that you guys have that really is foundational to how the company is able to operate.
Yeah, we're very in sync. We've known each other since we were 5, did a lot growing up. We played baseball together. We did like engineering projects together in high school. So we know each other very well. We know our natural inclinations when trying to solve problems. We know our strengths and our weaknesses. I think that's helped speed up the process for us in getting through. Every early startup has founder disagreements or, like tough conversations at the beginning. So I think that helped speed us up and not let those situations slow us down. So I think that's been very important. I think our relationship has definitely evolved over time. Like we're still good friends, but we now have this mission that's bigger than any one person, epilepsy, and trying to significantly improve the lives of patients. So I think that's forced our relationship to evolve for the better. Because we're now still good friends, but operating at hopefully a high level on the technical and operational side as well. So yeah, it's been great. I would recommend it to someone starting their company is start a company with someone that you trust and have good chemistry with.
Mhm. One thing I found really inspirational about Theta is most people in medtech startups are starting later in their career, but you guys started earlier. So I want to talk about why did you guys think you could solve this problem, and what about your backgrounds made you the people to do this?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it has been funny. We just actually I was at a conference this past week in LA for med tech, and I think I was the youngest person there by there's one other guy that was like 30 or early 30s, but I think I was the youngest person by a lot. So it definitely is like starting to stick out as we get further and further along. But yeah, I think by the time we decided to found the company, we had to identify an algorithm that was pretty effective in predicting seizures retrospectively. And we had some offers for raising a little bit of money in the beginning too. So I think we weren't necessarily questioning it as much in the beginning of like, okay, we're pretty young. Most companies in the med tech space are started by MD, PhDs. What's giving us the edge? Because at that point, we had discovered the technology that would be foundational to the company. So it wasn't really a conscious thought for us or decision. But I think over time, as I've experienced growing beyond just the technology to a company that's, attempting to build a regulatory plan and commercial plan, that there are some, there's pros and cons of our lack of experience. The pro is we tend to move quickly. We have a good handle on the state of machine learning that I think a lot of more clinically minded teams do not have in the space. So I think that has helped us advance technology a little bit further or faster. That's certainly a pro. A con is not having done it before. So we've done a lot of work to bring in the right experience, say on the regulatory side, on the clinical side, to support there, where Chris and I remain active and experts in the technology itself. So I think pros is definitely speed and energy. Cons is lack of experience, but you can kind of solve that with the right team building.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about advisors. How did you convince all these folks to come to the team? How did you find these people? How did you convince them to join your mission at Theta?
Yeah, definitely. So we have a great scientific advisory board with four key KOLs in the clinical epilepsy space, three practicing epileptologists, and one chief medical officer. So they've been fantastic. They're well known in the field, so it's allowed us to network pretty quickly into the epilepsy space, which is a pretty small community in the U.S. Yeah, to your question on how we convinced team members to join or support us. For background, epileptic seizure prediction, you talk to most physicians in the epilepsy space, it's considered the holy grail. Like many people have been attempting seizure prediction in the past. It's the idea that if you can alert prior to a seizure, you can completely shift epilepsy treatment from reactive, which it is currently, to preventative. You could use that early alert to prevent all the issues that patients face. So I think part of it was the mission was extremely enticing and ambitious. I think that was very interesting to our KOLs and other physicians in the space. We had a lot of success just interviewing neurologists and physicians, just because they're just excited about the mission. So I think that was part of it, and the initial traction. So it's obviously great to have an ambitious goal, but having some data showing that our algorithm was effective, at least retrospectively, and beating most attempts, if not all of the attempts previously. I think that was the selling point for a lot of people. So I think it's really about the mission. The people in epilepsy want to be a part of this mission because of its potential to shift treatment.
Where did you guys get the idea from? I know in initial stages there was a Fitbit for the brain, but how did you guys focus in on this specific use case?
So yeah, the original inspiration for like starting the research of developing sensors and developing different machine learning models was to create a consumer product. So I was a college athlete, played baseball at U Chicago. I wore a Whoop band. They're getting more popular now, but it was at the time a Fitbit on steroids. So I wore a Whoop for tracking my physical health. And the inspiration was society has invested a ton of money and understanding for common consumers like the heart's health and physical health. We have no way to actually quantify neurological health or mental health. So the original inspiration was to take similar principles to a Whoop or a Fitbit and apply it to neurological health. So that's what led us down the path of developing wearable sensors and different machine learning models for quantifying neurological health. And then we went very broad. I also worked in an algorithm for detecting biomarkers of Alzheimer's and EEG, sleep, obviously, which would have contributed to the consumer product. We went very wide in the research while we were in college just to see what was possible. And as we were doing that and building our machine learning ability, my cousin was diagnosed with epilepsy as a newborn. This was about 2 years into the research, and she had an extremely severe case of seizures And I spoken to her family quite a bit about the experience dealing with that, and realized how big of a problem it was for them, and then obviously so many others that there's no warning of an epileptic seizure. So it was through that personal experience our eyes were kind of open to this use case specifically for the technology we've been developing, which we felt at the time was a much clearer demand and kind of really burning problem that we could solve and help a lot of people really quickly. So decided to focus on epilepsy after that.
So then you guys talked a lot about these advisors and the mission that you're building, finding this niche and having a proven technology to solve it. Um, what did the first version of what Theta was building look like?
Yeah, it looked a lot different. Actually, our original target was to place the device at the back of the head on the occipital lobe. So that was for the initial consumer product. The occipital lobe has a lot of interesting information on alertness. Like the original goal was to measure sleep and see how well your brain's recovering during sleep, and then also measure gamma waves during the day, which is a measure of how active your brain is, how engaged it is. So the gamma waves are very present in the occipital lobe. So the original goal was to create a device that went over the hair, which was not a good idea at all. At the occipital lobe on the back, it looked kind of like it's just really bad marketing all around, but it looked kind of like a spider because it had like the enclosure with the technology, like the processing unit, and then it had little like electrodes that were sticking out of the enclosure so that I could go over top of the hair and kind of go through the hair. So that was the original design, not a good design at all, but it was like, it was a very first prototype. And then it evolved. We realized, okay, with epilepsy, we're seeing clear patterns in the pre-seizure period at the temporal lobes. Most seizures originate from the temporal lobes. So we were able to, pivot and get into a more like a sticker that went directly on the skin that didn't have to deal with hair. So, um, yeah, that was the initial prototype.
Okay. Very interesting. I don't know that many people would be excited to wear that,
It was
but
comfortable. Like if you laid back, like while you're sleeping, it was like pressing yeah, no, it's not a good idea. But
hmm,
yeah.
okay. So then let's talk about like the evolution of what y'all have now and what's the hardest problem that you guys are dealing with right now. Is it, on the ML side? Is it on the hardware side, et cetera?
Yeah. So now, to the current state, we have a fully functional device that fits behind the ear. It's battery powered, can stream data over Bluetooth. It's essentially an MVP EEG patch. We actually have some clinical data on the device where we had healthy participants wear the device simultaneous with the gold standard clinical EEG, which is these contacts all over the scalp. And we were able to compare directly the signals of our device coming from behind the ear to the EEG electrodes closest to it, which is the T7 and T8 electrodes, like right here on the side of the head. So we've seen good comparability of our signal to the clinical EEG in that initial test. So we essentially have a device that's small enough to fit behind the ear and that can acquire high quality clinical data, which is great. And then on the algorithm side, to de-risk the algorithm, we've gotten access to existing EEG recordings. So these were recordings collected in epilepsy patients across 3 hospitals, where to de-risk the algorithm, we would take those recordings and then just the EEG channels closest to where our device would be positioned, and then streamed the data as if it was coming in real time and measured our ability to predict each of the seizures. So that was the initial traction we had on some patients, and then we've expanded it to now over 100 patients with epilepsy's EEG recording. So fully functional device, and then an algorithm that's been retrospectively validated across over 100, about 125 patients with epilepsy's EEGs. So we had those two pieces. We used that data to raise our first bit of money. And now we're progressing to our first prospective study. So we'll actually be putting the sensors on patients with epilepsy and then measuring the predictive performance in real time with our own data. So that's the next step. The biggest challenges are actually going from kind of the current version to a version that's fully functional and scalable and reliable in real time. So we've invested in developing our software, so making sure that the connection with the mobile app is stable, and then getting our machine learning model to run in real time on our own software, so we can build this full system and validate it in real time easily, um, rather than kind of both pieces separately up to this point. So that's actually the biggest technical challenge right now is taking what we have and turning it into a system. Yeah.
It sounds like a lot of work that you guys have done on the system. Who is the team that contributed to all this?
Yeah, it was just my co-founder and I up to this point, working on it full time. So we had some contractors, but yeah, algorithm is completely developed by myself with Chris's support. And then, Chris led the development of the EEG patch itself. So it was really just us two working on it full time for the past year and a half or so since we graduated from school. Having closed some initial funding, we've hired an initial team. So we now have 3 postdocs working on machine learning and device R&D, and then recently brought on a experienced Medtronic engineer to lead our software development. So it's becoming less all our work, but up to this point, it had been just us two.
Hmm. Respect. Yeah. So you guys had some very promising retrospective data and now shifting to real patients. What's been different about that data in any way?
Yeah. So the primary difference is the data source is slightly lower on the scalp. So in the retrospective data, we were using pre-existing EEG. The positioning of the electrodes in the pre-existing EEG are close, but not completely behind the ear where our device is. It's slightly higher. It's like right on top on the side. So the signal is slightly different. We're not super concerned about that necessarily getting the model to scale to the differing positions because there's EEG collected across 120 patients. The EEG electrodes are positioned in different distances and areas every time. So it seems like our model has some pretty good tolerance for differencing in positions. But that's going to be different as the positioning of the device. But other than that, the goal of the device is for the signal to as closely mimic clinical EEG as possible, which is what we see at least in a controlled setting so far. So it's a difference in position. And then our first stage of the clinical validation will be done in the epilepsy monitoring unit at University of Chicago. So be in a controlled setting. Eventually, if that goes well, we'll send patients home with the device as well. So that'll be the first time that we have at-home recordings over long periods of time, which will introduce some more artifacts and technical challenges. But at least for the first stage, just the difference in positioning, that'll be the primary issue.
Okay. So then is the difference in position changing the way that you guys perform like signal acquisition at all?
Yeah, so not the acquisition, but the pre-processing may change slightly. There can be some artifact in behind the ear from the muscles there, from the mastoid. You also get a lot of kind of EEG specific, you get a lot of chewing artifacts. So if someone's chewing, their muscles behind the ear are moving, so you can get some artifact in the signal. So we'll kind of see how it's performing, but there may be some changes to pre-processing, kind of reduce that artifact in that study.
Okay. So a lot of more like specific noise reduction things that might be implemented. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Earlier you were talking about how you did a lot of research during college, specifically in the neurotech space. Could you talk more about that?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, Chris and I did a lot of independent research while we were in school. Most of my work was on the ML side. So what I'd do is find a disease state that I was interested in, go out and see if there's some publicly available data collected on patients with that neurological disorder, which there is a lot, kind of surprisingly. There's a website that hosts like all of the publicly available EEG data that has a surprising amount of data on a diverse patient group. So I'd go out and identify those data sets. And then I did a lot of research in tweaking machine learning architectures. So I mentioned my prior experience in computer vision. I was doing a lot of work in tweaking traditional computer vision algorithms to be more effective for EEG signals specifically, which have different details to the signal that are important to capture. So yeah, did work, found some sleep data initially, developed a model for detecting the 5 stages of sleep that was pretty effective just using a single electrode. And then was doing a lot of work in Alzheimer's as well. There was a data set that collected resting state EEG across about 30 patients with Alzheimer's, 30 healthy controls, and I was developing a model for trying to detect the biomarkers of Alzheimer's versus the healthy controls as a diagnostic tool as well. So a lot of open source data and in making improvements to the traditional computer vision, and then that acted as kind of the warm up to develop the prediction model. Yeah.
Okay. And then in parallel was Chris kind of working on the other side of things. So wearables, PCBs, selectable PCBs, etc.
Yeah, definitely. So he really came into his own after graduating and when we founded the company in 2024, but doing a lot of kind of initial work on what's necessary to design the EEG circuit, different noise characteristics. How should we actually design the architecture of the circuit to make it low power enough that it can be worn for a long period of time? So, but that upfront research was done then too. Chris and I are both self-taught on the electrical side. He studied chemical engineering, so he had some experience in engineering more broadly, but we're self-taught on that side as well. So it took some time to figure it out. But yeah, he's doing a lot of that research.
Very cool. So then, I guess my next question, there is so many metrics that people are investigating now, like you mentioned with Blip or Ring, so many different wearables. Why specifically did you guys want to look into neurotech?
Yeah. I mean, to me, there's a massive opportunity. I mean, the heart is interesting. Obviously, there's cardiovascular disease that needs better treatment, better outcomes. But the brain, given our understanding, is the most complex, thing in, that humans interact with every day. It has billions of neurons and billions, if not trillions, of connections between neurons. Extremely complicated, and everything that we experience is downstream of the brain in some way. So I was just drawn to it as an organ, I guess, because of how complex it is and how little we understand it. Um, so that was the original inspiration of, developing the consumer product, is like, let's just try to understand what's going on a little bit better. We have no data on this longitudinally. It'd be interesting to see what's happening. And then, because of that, because it's kind of a new field, a lot of companies going after EEG monitoring, it felt like there was a lot of opportunity there versus other biosignals that have had a lot of companies succeed in detecting certain events. So I think it was drawn to its complexity, but also the opportunity to be kind of a pioneer in that space.
Yeah, the brain is pretty cool. Going more back to the self-taught aspect, what challenges did that bring? And do you feel like it took longer to do things? Did you guys have mentors? Like, how did you navigate that whole situation?
Yeah. I mean, that was my favorite part of building Theta Neurotech. The initial stage was just learning. I enjoy the technical aspect of Theta quite a bit. And I've grown more into less technical, more operational as we've tried to scale, which has been an evolution for me. But that was my favorite part. I mean, didn't necessarily have specific mentors on the technical side. We built them over time. But I think for us, it was really about just trying things out. On the machine learning side, is just running as many experiments as I can to actually learn what works and what doesn't. And then on the hardware side, trying to reduce iteration cycles. So getting a new design out as quickly as possible so we can see if it actually works or not, rather than getting an order out, waiting for a month, and then, finding out it doesn't actually work. So I think the initial challenge was trying to speed up iteration time so we could learn what was working and what wasn't. But it certainly could have gone maybe a little bit faster if we were both formally trained in both of these areas. But we kind of saw it as we needed to push through it to raise the first bit of money to actually bring people into the team that were formally trained into it. We just needed to figure out ourselves and show some traction. So might have saved some time, but I think it was necessary. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the whole fun of it, being able to learn new things and really challenge yourself as well. Okay, let's talk about MedTech Innovator. How was that? There was a lot of really cool companies invited, and like you mentioned, you were probably one of the youngest people there. What was good about that experience? What surprised you? What did you take away? What did you learn? Yeah.
Yeah, it's only been, I got back a day and a half ago, so it hasn't been too long. I haven't been able to reflect too much. But the first impression was it was extremely high quality event. Like, it was the densest concentration of med tech talent and, broader opinions that I've experienced so far. Like, everyone there I spoke to was doing something really interesting and making good progress with it. So I think that was definitely a standout. There's also a really great representation from the government. There's the director of CRH from the FDA, as well as representatives from CMS, NIH, and then you had representatives from AMA there as well. So there was a really good representation. I was pretty impressed with their ability to bring those stakeholders in. So those were very positive. We pitched, to a number of judges, which the feedback was great. We got some good ideas for the commercial plan. So I think that was all really solid. It was also in a nice venue. It was in LA, good weather, so that was nice. It was just interesting navigating it. As young guys there, maybe felt like a little bit of outsiders, just because a lot of team members were a little bit more, or a lot of the other companies or people were a lot more experienced. But so maybe that was a drawback, but it's not really on them. So, but overall, it was a great experience.
That's good to hear. Was there any feedback that you think is going to affect your guys' commercial strategy or milestones, roadmap, etc.?
Yeah, absolutely. A big theme of the meeting was reimbursement, like making sure that you're designing a product that is reimbursable. I think as engineers, we fall in love with our technology, and I can be prone to that, I think, at times. Like we fall in love with our technology, we fall in love with the product. And even if the technology and product, in theory, will successfully improve a patient group's life if it's utilized. The fact of the matter is, if it can't get paid for or it can't map to the right stakeholders in the medtech space, then it will never reach the patient and not actually improve their lives. So I think that was a big key for us, is thinking, how do we take the technology we have currently and mapping it to reimbursement that allows us to reach patients faster, and more effectively. So I think that was a big theme that, as an engineer, that wasn't my initial thought when starting the company, that we now have to build a more robust strategy around. We have some good ideas, but I think that was a big theme that I took away. Um,
Can we talk about the reimbursement strategy right now and what you think is changing?
yeah, definitely. Yeah. So it's a little tricky for our device. Where the seizure prediction component is a completely novel technology and a novel use case. There are wearable devices that are used in epilepsy for detecting convulsive seizures after they've started, to alert a caretaker that, hey, your child is possibly having a convulsive seizure right now. So that's, I guess, close. There's no device that can provide an alert prior to a seizure, and that's allowing the patient to take action. So because of that, the reimbursement for the device for seizure prediction is relatively underdeveloped, which can be exciting, but can also be, extremely debilitating for a company trying to get the device out to patients. The nice thing about our product is there's two pieces to it. There's the prediction component for the patient, and then the monitoring component for the physician. So in addition to providing the patient with the early alert, we also are developing software and capability to be able to provide the longitudinal data back to the physician, so they can determine how well patients are actually responding to medication, or how many seizures they're actually having at home. So that part of the product is reimbursable. There is existing codes, EEG codes, for allowing physicians to be reimbursed for the collection and review of the EEG data. So we're still developing this now, but our strategy is anchoring reimbursement around the monitoring component, where there's established infrastructure there for billing, so we can get the device paid for, or at least most of the cost burden off the patient, and using that as our primary way to map to current reimbursement, while building towards novel reimbursement for the seizure prediction. So yeah, that's the approach, is making sure we're taking advantage of what currently exists, and then using that revenue to support the development of new coding and billing infrastructure for the prediction component itself.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And remote patient monitoring is definitely picking up, especially after COVID. That's a really interesting space to be in. You guys also recently closed an oversubscribed pre-seed round. What was the hardest part about that? Was it the storytelling, going through technical diligence, going through regulatory risk, reimbursement? Like what made that challenging and what helped you guys close out the round the way it did?
Yeah, I don't actually think the main challenge was anything to do with the company, because we had good, for a pre-seed company, we kind of realized after the fact that we had developed the technology very far, Chris and I, and had great, a bunch of patients have signed up for a wait list. So all the metrics were there. Maybe there's some weak points in our strategy that we needed to shore up as we went, but I think we progressed pretty significantly by the time we were raising our first round. The bigger challenge was actually just building the network and building the connections. It was coming right out of college, complete from scratch, pretty much no connections in the med tech space, very few in the VC world beyond kind of the initial experiences I've had. So, and the bigger challenge was just building relationships over time. It's tough in pre-seed. You kind of have to build a relationship and ask for money soon after, which is not ideal. So I think that took some time. I think that was the biggest challenge. But we got through it and have funding for the next stage.
That's awesome. So you guys were founded in 2022. Looking back now, was there times where it was hard, like you weren't sure where you were going? And how'd you deal with those moments? Because I feel like everyone has them.
Yeah. 2022 is when we started the idea for the consumer product. Like we're still in college developing the technology. I think there's definitely a point, I think it was probably 2023, where we weren't sure if like the consumer route was the right way to go. We didn't know if people were actually going to put a device on their head to monitor their neurological health. So that was definitely an interesting point in the company. Like we didn't technically found the company until like actually found it legally in 2024. So we were still kind of in the research phase. There wasn't necessarily a company to shut down at that point. But I think big pivot or big clarity moment came from realizing that the technology could be applied to epilepsy. It solved our question of, would people actually wear this? Like the bar value or the amount of value we're providing for an epilepsy group or predicting seizures would be much higher than the value we provide to a common consumer monitoring their neurological health. So it allowed us to kind of solve for that question of, will someone wear this behind their ear for the amount of value we're providing? So we raised the bar of value, which I think really significantly helped, and made a lot of progress on the device. The device was, as I mentioned, it was pretty ugly previously. So we made a much nicer one that was pretty hidden behind the ear that I think in the future, hopefully most patients will appreciate it as pretty discreet and hidden. So I think those two inflection points opened the doors for us to kind of keep going and found the company officially and start building this traction.
Okay, so a few questions to wrap up. What is the impact that you hope Theta will have? Like looking at this product in 10 years, how do you see a patient using it? How do you see it affecting their life? What impact do you hope to see for yourself?
Yeah. Yeah, in 10 years, I hope we would have either initiated or, already begun a shift in epilepsy treatment. As I mentioned, everything's reactive currently. You kind of wait for a patient to have a seizure and then respond. Our goal is to shift that. So the first step is obviously the monitoring use case, give physicians more context on what's actually happening to the patient outside the hospital so they can make changes to treatment faster and make decisions that are more preventative rather than reactive. That's one, and then providing predictive alerts to the patients so they can prevent injuries. I think ultimately our goal is for our device to inform treatment itself. So be able to predict a seizure and inform the deployment of fast-acting medications or stimulation to actually prevent the upcoming seizure from happening. So I think in 10 years, our hope is that our device is not only providing data for physicians and predictive alerts to the patients, but also allowing for treatment and seizure reduction as a result of having those early alerts. So that's the big thing that we're aiming for, as well as expanding to other indications. There's evidence of pre-migraine patterns, pre-stroke patterns, and EEG signals as well, being able to expand to other use cases and become a platform as well. So I think informing treatment and then being able to expand our scope is an important mission for myself and trying to build that into the company.
Zooming out beyond what Theta is doing in the use case right now, is that kind of your lifelong mission?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'd say that's the goal is to develop personalized and precise treatment of neurological health based on real-time EEG data and real-time deployment of treatment. I think that's the goal. Not only to prevent dangerous situations or debilitating situations for patients, but to potentially augment neurological performance into the future. So being able to determine how ways that we can improve a common consumer's neurological ability in the future as well. So I think that's the lifelong mission, at least the decade or two long mission for myself and the company.
For someone who's in a similar position right now, early in their career, seeing a problem that they want to solve in the field of medicine, what is advice for them that you have, and how should they think about taking their first steps?
Yeah, definitely. Something I've learned is that as you get further into the medical space, you realize how complicated and somewhat screwed up the system is. Like, I think that's just a general consensus across the board. Everyone I've met, the longer they spend in the field, the more and more they discover that. So I would say my advice to young people wanting to start medical device companies. Like, again, a lot of the young people I know start companies in other areas of tech. They're a little bit less intimidating. It's a little bit more common for a person right out of college to start a software company, another company in tech. I'd say to young people that are interested in medical devices or, biotech broadly, is don't be intimidated. You can figure it out. It just takes time and effort. There's a ton of problems in the medical space that need solving, and we need desperately young people with energy to solve them. So just try not to be intimidated in the beginning with it. Learn more about the medical field over time and continue along. And I think, we're making headway in that sense. I think a lot of young people are turned away from medical devices or med tech because of how intimidating it can be. I just hope that at least I can be an example of responding to that intimidation and continuing forward. And I hope that more young people are, enter the field because, it's desperately needed, as I said. Yeah.
I think you're an inspiration and a testament that young people can overcome these challenges, and people do need to be solving these problems. If you're passionate about it, why not just do it? But yeah, thank you so much for taking the time today. I really appreciate it and enjoyed it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.